So welcome everybody. My name is Eric Owens. I'm director of the International Studies program, and it's a terrific pleasure to have with us some of our illustrious alumni, alumni, and I really want to start by thanking them for taking the time to be here. About a week ago, I put out a call to alumni to say that our students are really eager to hear from them about their career paths and their current job experiences. And to start to not just amidst the pandemic, but that's, of course, that's our primary starting point here, but also thinking longer term about pathways out of the international studies major and minor. And your presence here provides terrific examples for students, and your willingness to talk to them in one-on-one arrangements through Eagle Exchange or email or whatever is just so generous. And I want to really thank you. It makes an enormous, enormous difference just to know that you're out there and ready to help students. So a huge thank you to you all. To those listening, our goal today is to introduce you to some of our alumni and the career pathways that they've taken. They will each spend a few minutes introducing themselves and tell us about their career journey and what they're up to right now, and share a few lessons that they've learned. And I hope that you'll reach out to them through other means like Eagle Exchange or LinkedIn if you have further questions about their pathway, because they've all been generous to offer their time as a mentor as well. So without further ado, why don't we get started? And I don't have a particular order, but unless you all have, let's start with Shana, and we'll move on from there. We'll spend maybe 6 minutes or so with each person doing an introduction, and then we'll open up for questions and comments and further clarifications. So thanks again, everyone, and Shana, off to you.
Hi, everyone. Professor Owens, be sure to cut me off if I run long. I don't know if I have a 6-minute spiel or not, so please keep me in check. I graduated from Boston College in 2014. I was an international studies major, as I'm sure some of you are, and I was also a philosophy minor. At the time that I was graduating, I had an interest in law, but I wasn't confident enough that I was ready to jump straight into law school. I was also considering other types of graduate school. I also was feeling a little burnt out after writing a thesis and wasn't sure if I wanted to go straight into academia from there. So I applied for jobs, and the first job that I had out of BC was working at a large business immigration firm, which aligned with some of the interests that I had when I was at school. I wrote my thesis on immigrants and access to healthcare. My focus was really immigration law and public policy. So it fit some of my goals, and I learned a lot from the year that I spent there, but I also learned what I didn't like about large firm culture or some of the other quirks that came with the job. So while I was there, I was still applying for other jobs, looking to move into more public interest work. And I ended up working at a nonprofit in New York for 4 years called the Vera Institute of Justice. They're criminal justice reform focused, but they have a pretty robust immigration department that's focused exclusively on deportation defense, because the organization considers the deportation system a driver of mass incarceration, and the whole organization is dedicated to ending mass incarceration. So for 4 years, I was overseeing a program that provided attorneys to people around the country that were in deportation proceedings and were detained, so they didn't have access to lawyers. And I learned a lot from everybody I worked with there. I worked with lawyers and non-lawyers. A lot of our work was program management and evaluation, but I learned that my favorite part of that work was really seeing what the lawyers on the ground were doing day to day. I was hearing the outcomes of their cases. I was reading their briefs and compiling them into resources and newsletters. And the more time I spent doing that, and the more I spoke with my colleagues that were in the legal field, I felt really confident in the decision to go back to school. So I started at Northeastern University School of Law this past year. I am finishing out my last set of exams next week. Law school is a lot of work, but I'm really happy that this is where I wound up. And I definitely wouldn't have made it there straight out of school. I think I really benefited from taking some time to work, to get feedback and advice from lots of people. You'll meet a lot of lawyers who tell you don't go to law school. You want to build up enough confidence to say you want to go anyway. And Northeastern's been a really great place. It's a very public interest focused school. I encourage you, when you look at law schools, to do so with a discerning eye. Just don't go based on the rankings or what you may have heard anecdotally from other people. Really do your research to make sure it has the programming you want and the focus you want. Northeastern does a co-op system, so I knew that I wanted to work a lot while I was in law school. And I'm going to have the opportunity basically every other semester to work throughout the school year. And I'm really excited about that.
That's
That's
great.
pretty much all I have.
That's terrific. That's a great start. I really appreciate it, Shayna. Why don't we just go in on the screen that I'm looking at here. Isaiah, you're next for me. So why don't you take a couple minutes? Thanks for being here.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. Similar to Shayna, I did not know what I wanted to do, and so that's kind of how I ended up at law school, or stumbling my way to law school. But as a little bit more background, I'm from Maryland originally. Came to BC. I was there 2013, graduated 2017. And through my internships, I was trying to figure out where I wanted to be: government, nonprofit, some sort of business. So I worked on Capitol Hill after freshman year. I worked for a nonprofit called the International Center for Religion and Diplomacy after sophomore year. And then I worked for this small private law firm outside of DC after my junior year. And I still had no idea what I wanted to do. So during my senior year, I was looking at think tanks and different nonprofits and trying to figure out if I wanted to continue doing like specialized research. And a lot of places wanted graduate school, or they wanted years of work experience that I didn't have. So I thought, well, law school is something else I'm considering. Maybe I'll start looking into that, see if I get a couple years working, get exposure, and then maybe I'll know what I want to do. So I actually got my job through the Boston College Career Fair. I met Paul Weiss, which is a big corporate law firm in New York. And I was a litigation paralegal there for 2 years. And I didn't know how I was going to feel about it, what the experience was going to be like, whether I would come out knowing like what kind of law I wanted to do. But they were the only ones to offer me a job. So that made the decision really easy. And when I went, I found out that it was like the perfect place for me to be. I think in a big corporate law firm setting where you have 900 attorneys and you're like one of 90 paralegals, it's really a crapshoot based on what team you get, whether you're going to have a really positive experience or whether you're going to have a miserable experience. And people at my firm, like other paralegals, definitely decided law school was not the route they wanted to go with. But for me, I was lucky enough to have amazing people in my office, work with some amazing attorneys, and get some really good insight into what I wanted to do with a law degree, and what I saw my career as a lawyer being. Because a lot of the people who I worked with were in positions that I saw myself wanting to do or wanting to be in the future. So being in New York City, I was applying to schools, and eventually it came down to working out me applying to law school at the same time as my now fiance applying to med schools. And she knew she was going to be in New York. So I was kind of like, fingers crossed, New York, let's make it happen. And last minute I got into NYU. And so I was like, that's a done deal. Kind of didn't look into different aspects of the law school just because of the way my priorities were set up. But once I got into NYU and knew that's where I was going to go, I started learning that even if I had made the decision, like regardless of my fiance, NYU is probably the best fit for me, and it's turned out to be that way. I think what I really appreciate about NYU is they just like support you in whatever you want to do, both public interest and private. And I kind of know what kind of lawyer I want to be in terms of like the workflow and team structure and how I want to approach the work, but I don't know, like, I think what I learned from the firm is there's not one type of law that I want to practice all the time. And the benefit of coming to NYU, where they have such strong practices all over the place, is I've gotten basically all the doors are open. So this summer I'll be working with a nonprofit doing habeas corpus work, which works on appeals for death penalty. And I'm planning on doing interviews for big law firms next summer, because there's a whole complicated process where you apply for things like a whole year in advance, and it's kind of stupid. But I think there's enough room here for me to pivot depending on where I find my fit. And so far, it's nice knowing that in the future I'm set up to kind of pursue whatever I feel passionate about, and also having great people around me at the school right now, to enjoy the experience. If you got to do 3 years of law school, you might as well enjoy it while you do it. Anyways, my time at BC was amazing. I made a lot of lifelong friends and had a great time, and really enjoyed the international studies program. I was even an IS peer advisor and got to see Professor Nakazato 3 times a week hanging out in the IS offices. So glad to see you. I haven't seen the goatee since I left BC, so great to see that. But yeah,
it's a
been,
pandemic goatee now. It's getting nice and long.
Yeah, it's very full, very established, which is nice. But yeah, if anyone wants to talk to me about different things at BC, like I did marching band, I was on the rowing team, I did a root bay, all those different programs, happy to talk about that. I have job experience and still feel like I don't know anything, but if you find any of the things I listed relevant, I'm happy to talk about those things. So yeah, thanks for having me today.
Thanks so much, Isaiah. Let's stick with law students, since we have three law students and 2 practitioners. Camilla, could you go next for us? Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, I have a reasonably similar story to Isaiah because I'm also in my first year at NYU, but I actually have known I wanted to be a lawyer for a very long time, like probably since I was 7 or 8. So that path was a lot more certain for me. But having that certainty, which a lot of people have, I think allowed me to kind of open up to different things because I knew where I thought I would end up. So I was almost testing against it, constantly seeing if maybe I was wrong, maybe I should try something else. And not having there not really be clearly like a law major at school. You could be pre-law, but you have to choose your own major. For me, I was able to kind of check out other things I'd been interested in and never really given too much thought to because I knew I wanted to go to law school. So I started out being an econ major and got through a big chunk of the econ major before in my sophomore year. I started the IS major. So instead of having that be my concentration, I actually completed the econ major as well as doing the IS major, and then focused on political science as my concentration. And I knew I'd like econ, but I was really, really set on law. So it was surprising to me how much I really liked a lot of my economics classes and the statistics and the analytical programming in that area. So I still knew I wanted to go to law school long term, but instead of going straight out of undergrad, I kind of wanted to finish out the different areas I liked about econ and about that area. So I decided to work at Liberty Mutual as an intern. And then also after I graduated in their analytics development program, which I recommend any rotational program in general. I think they're really great work experiences after you get out of college. You can get a lot of variety of experiences, and they have them in fields that aren't just analytics. They have them in all types of fields, even a lot of law firms will have sort of rotational programs for different areas, but I still recommend them because I got to learn a lot about what kind of team environment I like, what kind of manager style I like, what kind of work style I like, regardless of what you end up doing long term. I thought it was really valuable, and I would not have felt comfortable starting law school right out of college without that experience the way I do now. So I really recommend it. But even working there, I realized that I liked what I was doing, but it was still not to the level that I enjoyed law and those aspects that I've always been really interested in. I'd always really gone towards international law primarily, being an immigrant myself, and having kind of grown up with 2 different legal systems in my mind. That really interested me always, how different countries do things differently and how countries play with each other in the legal sphere. So that's what I went into law school doing. Because of that, I did look very specifically into what law schools I was looking at. They had to have an international law program and have international law related clinics and classes and professors. So that helped me really narrow things down because I did know what I was looking at, and NYU was just the best choice for me. New York just had a great opportunity of international organizations, the UN, things like that. And NYU just had really great clinics for things like that, seminars, as well as summer opportunities and ties to those things. So that really helped me narrow down, and I've been really, really happy at NYU thus far. I was able to take an international law elective this semester, and NYU's ties with different international human rights organizations has set them up to have a fellowship program that I actually applied to and got selected for in October, which seems very early, but it's kind of how these things work sometimes. So I was matched with an international human rights organization, which I will now be doing remotely because of coronavirus, but I'm still really excited. I'll be working with the Southern Africa Litigation Center, which does human rights and direct services litigation for all of the countries in Southern Africa. And I'm really excited to do that and kind of see more firsthand what different areas of international human rights law and international arbitration I really like. But like Isaiah said, I echo anything. If any of this sounds interesting, or if you're someone who has always been interested in law and now are now having doubts or anything, I'm open to discussing anything and giving any advice. So just reach out, let me know.
Thanks so much, Camilla. This is great. Why don't we stay on the econ track for a second? Elizabeth, you are working in related law and economics environment, right, with trade, et cetera. So why don't you pick up next and give us a picture into your working life. Thanks for being here.
Sure, absolutely. This is fun. I have been away from BC for 10 years now. This would have been my 10-year reunion, and it seems really bizarre to say that. I think I might have been one of the earlier classes of the International Studies program, but of course thought it was excellent, and it has had a really big impact on my path. So happy to walk through that really quickly. Like I said, I graduated in 2010. I was an international studies major and Africa and African diaspora studies minor. I studied abroad in Ghana in my junior year, became really interested in international development, and took that with me after graduating and decided to join the Peace Corps. I went to Mali, was in a small village doing health education work, but it was kind of a crazy time to be there. There was a lot of unsettlement. People were generally nervous. There was activity by Al-Qaeda in the north and some security stuff going on. So the group was eventually evacuated, and I think the experience had me thinking a lot about, you know, where I felt about international development generally, and what were some of the drawbacks and challenges there, and how I might be most useful kind of in that sphere. And for me, I started thinking then about the rule of law, because it was really clear that without, you know, a secure system in place there wasn't really a lot of room for growth and development, because out of nowhere, everything would shift. So I came back from the Peace Corps. I wasn't quite ready to go to law school. I will just do a plug for taking some time off. I think right after graduation from college is like a nerve-wracking period, not really knowing what the next steps will be after having your life kind of really planned out for a long time. But if you can kind of get over that emotion, I think it's a really cool time, because you can go anywhere and do anything in ways that it gets so much harder to do later on in life. So I moved to New York City, and I started working at Milbank Tweed, a large law firm in the financial district. And I was not a paralegal. I was actually a diversity assistant. So I was supporting the Diversity and Women's Initiative program there, trying to help diverse and female associates at the firm succeed. And you'll know, the more you kind of look at, we call big law firms, the more you'll start to see all the stories out there about how challenging it can be for diverse and female associates in that environment. So it was a really interesting look. Got to see a lot of kind of the negative sides of big law, but still ultimately decided to go to law school, driven mostly by the idea that I really wanted to still kind of explore this intersection between law and international development. So that brought me to DC. I went to Georgetown. I still think DC is an excellent place to be if you're interested in international issues. Also, if you're a lawyer, just because the types of law you can do are so varied. government, think tanks, big law firms, whatever, it's all there. And there are excellent opportunities for internships, both in school and in the summers. So I was happy to be at Georgetown. And while there, I got introduced to this field of international trade. And that came because I had a summer internship. My very first summer, I went to Geneva and worked at something called the International Center for Trade and Sustainable Development. I feel like Geneva is kind of like the DC of the world, with all the international organizations and opportunities there, and just really fell in love with my time there and decided to go back and study abroad there. My final year, I think it was my fall semester of my third year, and I studied at the Graduate Institute for International Development Studies there, and think that school is phenomenal. I actually wish that I had known it existed. Pro tip, if you want to get a master's, going to London or Geneva, great place to do it, a lot cheaper, really interesting opportunities, especially for people interested in international issues. So anyways, knew I wanted to do international trade after I graduated law school, followed the kind of typical path. This will be another tip, which is when you're in law school, you start to, and I think in life generally, get to hear a lot of messages about all this you should be doing. I don't know if students are already feeling that way, but it's definitely a message that kind of hits you hard in law school. You should be taking these courses, you should be on this journal, and you should be doing XYZ things. So I would say, like, do what you can to fight against that and really make the experience what you want it to be, because it's a lot of money, and again, a really unique time to get to kind of explore your interests. So I did that to some extent, got way overloaded with all the different shoulds, but still tried to go abroad and do other things at the same time, but led to just a really busy time. I think law school is hectic. And then decided to follow the path to go into big law firms, another big should that you feel the pressure of in law school. I think it's a little bit of a reality check. I think a reason why a lot of lawyers say don't go to law school is because of the cost. So it's just something to be aware of. It can be a little bit overwhelming when you graduate and you end up, if you didn't have help, or you don't have scholarships, or you didn't choose the school that gave you the best financial aid, you'll likely graduate with like $200,000 plus in loans, which translates into like over $1,000 a month that you need to be prepared to pay for at least 10 years. So that's a lot of pressure and overwhelming, because the job market can be a little bit uncertain. So for me, I felt the safest going into a big law firm to start, knowing that there could be opportunities to kind of evolve away from that, because it's harder to get into big law firms if you don't go immediately. So I went to Latham & Watkins. That's where I am right now. I'm in my 4th year. I'm an associate there, and I practice in an international trade law sphere in DC. Again, DC has really interesting international law opportunities. And my specific practice is export controls and economic sanctions. And to try and break that down, because I think realizing now it's not something most people know a ton about, but you definitely have heard about it if you watch the news and you're seeing everything about Venezuela and the Maduro regime, or Russia, or Iran, the Iran deal. We, for foreign policy and national security reasons, have decided that certain countries are kind of off limits for US parties. That's Cuba, Iran, Syria, North Korea, and the Crimea region of Ukraine. And so that creates a lot of challenges for global businesses, but also on the more kind of public sector side of things, humanitarian organizations who are trying to operate in those areas. So I've put together a practice where I definitely have the corporate side with our corporate clients, but have a large pro bono practice with a lot of humanitarian organizations doing work in Syria and other kind of terrorist controlled areas. So yeah, I'm just jotting down some other notes of tips I wanted to share. I think one big one, again, just because of the loan burden and how that feels a little bit overwhelming while you're looking at law schools, if that's what you choose to do, be very aware of loan forgiveness programs. I didn't do this because I didn't go into public interest in the end, but my fiance went and became a public defender, is relying heavily on the loan forgiveness program, where you work in public interest for 10 years and then your loans are forgiven if you make it that long. So that's just one random fact to keep in mind when you're thinking about your options.
Great, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Let's wrap up with our intros with Josh, and who's working in immigration law now, and then we'll open up for a conversation and questions. So thank you, Josh, for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hey everyone, I'm Josh. I graduated 2018 from BC, so pretty recently. When I was graduating from BC in my senior year, I think I had this feeling that a lot of Eagles do, where I was really scared about the future. And at the job fairs, I just saw these like big law firms, big, finance firms, but I also did a Rupe. I did a lot of like organizing on campus, activism, stuff like that. And I wanted to make the world a better place, but I also need to pay my bills. So I was trying to figure out a good balance between those two. And I saw a posting on Eagle Link about an immigration law firm, and I was an IS major and also a Hispanic studies minor, and had some Spanish skills and studied abroad in Cuba, and like had these skills that I wanted to use in my job, and figured, hey, this would seem like a good idea to kind of combine the paying bills part of life, as well as at least making the world a little bit better, because it was a small immigration firm. We focus on family immigration. So that's, if you've ever seen 90 Day Fiance, it's like fiance visas, marriage visas. We also do a little bit of asylum work, some deportation defense. And I've been working there ever since I graduated back in June. So coming up on my 2-year anniversary there. And I've really liked it so far. I've really enjoyed working at a small immigration firm. So we're in downtown Boston. It's called Law Offices of Joshua Goldstein. And we only have 3 attorneys, so it's really tiny. I have a lot of clients, and it's really, really hands-on. Essentially, the law firm's like, here's 100 clients, they are yours. If nothing gets done, then it's on you. So it's a little terrifying, but it's also a really good experience. I was kind of thrown into the fire, but I think that's one of the best ways to learn sometimes. And I love the focus on family immigration law. I think in immigration law, there's kind of the corporate side with H-1B visas and O-1s and a lot of more corporate focused. And then there's also the family side, and both certainly have merits, and the benefits are certainly better in the corporate side. But the family side is a really amazing opportunity to have a lot of client contact, a lot of face-to-face experiences with your clients. You get to, hand them a green card at the end of the process. You get to know them, you get to know their family, you get to create bonds with people that you never would have met otherwise. It's a really amazing experience. So I really recommend it. And through that, I got involved in the Boston Immigrant Justice Accompaniment Network, which is the immigration bond fund here in Massachusetts. And we do a lot of work with folks who are detained by ICE here in Massachusetts to try to do everything we can to get them out of ICE detention. So whether that's paying for their bond, whether that's finding them a lawyer, whether that's figuring out transportation for them to get from the ICE office to wherever they're headed. And I do that on the side. So it's not necessarily any paid work, but that's because of my experience, at my day job. I'm able to give at least a little bit of clarity to the organizers there about what to do, and able to organize their legal wing of things. And that's been an incredible experience. And because of that, I'm actually looking to transition out of my job and into more public service, public interest work, and seeing if I can get paid doing what I'm doing kind of on the side in the evenings now. So obviously I'm not in law school yet. I haven't started applying yet. I certainly am leaning that direction. I think, like many people have said, I really think taking time off was the right move. For a second there, graduating, I was like, oh, I should just apply to law school to have the certainty of, a job after that. But I don't think I would have the clarity of what actually being a lawyer is like, and seeing the not so glamorous sides of it and still deciding to be a lawyer, because I think that's important. Realizing when you're, up to your head in paperwork and it's just super tedious and annoying, and still choosing to go forward with it. I think that's a really important experience, at least for me, that I've had to make. And that's, I guess, if I had one piece of advice to people, I would say, if you have at least 2% hesitation towards law school, just take a little bit of time off, go do anything, especially being somewhere in the law, in the legal fields, so that you can gain that experience to, when you do say yes to law school, or if you say yes to law school, you'll actually be kind of full-heartedly in it. And obviously I haven't fully chosen that yet, but I've certainly appreciated that, seeing some of my friends go through the same process, but chose to go to law school. And I think they may be a little less secure in that choice. So if any of that, interested you, I always love speaking with students about this work. It really means a lot to me. And yeah, looking forward to what other people have to say too.
Thanks so much, Josh. What a terrific set of diverse interests and experiences, just from the 5 of you. And that's really a testament to what our program is like. I wanted to start with Piper, who had a question for you, and I know she has another engagement to get to as well. So go straight for it, Piper. Thanks for coming.
Hi, everyone. I just want to say thank you all for coming. It's obviously very helpful for students. I'm a senior IS major, and I have apparently disregarded all of your advice, and I am going right to law school in the fall. I'm Canadian, so I'm going to law school at home, which does kind of help with some of the loan burden some of you talked about, because obviously my law school tuition is a lot lower than the US. And I think my question is, I definitely have an interest in international law, and a lot of the things Elizabeth was talking about in terms of working with groups in other countries and pro bono work really appeals to me. I think I have heard from quite a few lawyers later in their career. I worked at a corporate law firm last summer. I've heard this whole kind of get your foundation at a corporate law firm, and when you've built up a practice, that's your moment to move to kind of more of like a pro bono public service field. And kind of like my dream is one day kind of like UN government type related work. But do any of you think there is an opportunity kind of like earlier in your career, or even being a student, in which you can kind of start to engage in that without having to kind of build up your reputation and be able to kind of hop in from a reputable part of your career?
Great, thanks. Anyone's welcome to jump in. Thank you, Piper.
I can jump into this, mainly just because that's kind of the area that I'm looking into in law, and I've kind of gotten some experience in how that career trajectory plays out. There is a lot of area of things. I know UN kind of is the first one that comes to mind just because it's the one that's most known, but as you kind of look into the field more, there's a lot of different organizations and a lot of areas where you can do similar types of work that you would be doing in the UN, or things like that aren't necessarily just the UN, even though the UN is a great option. I think the UN specifically, the way their hiring process works is very, very competitive and very difficult. It's very rare that you can jump in there in a legal aspect before you have 3 or 4 years of experience post law school. It's just the way their tiering works, and it's just a very black box style system for getting a job there. But it's definitely an option, and I know a lot of people who do end up working there, and they do have clinical programs that a lot of law schools have, as well as internship things that you can do in different UN groups. So I would recommend looking at that, because making connections in that sphere, I think, is the quickest and best way to make ties into the public area. But I also have heard a lot of recommendations, and I'm probably going to follow this advice, that building a foundation in big law or private law and trying to make that direction into international law, be it in international trade, international arbitration, international commercial law, is not going to hurt you in getting into that kind of public interest or government UN type work. That's probably what I'm going to do to get a better foundation in my skills. And I've heard that it's not necessarily detrimental to later transitioning into more public interest or international government work. So I would recommend kind of looking into both. There's definitely opportunities on both sides, but I think it's very valuable to not necessarily jump into it right off the bat, because they don't have the resources to give you all the training that you might need to really like dive into those projects.
Great. Anyone else want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I'll just add that It's a good question. I think that's definitely a common interest going into law school. And I would echo what Camila was saying, is trying to get connections as much as you can. If you can get internships while you're in law school in those organizations, it's interesting because I had a friend who in law school, and I'm happy to put you in touch with her if it's helpful, who took kind of the strictly like UN path, and she, has lived in a couple of really interesting places and started to kind of do that work. She became really frustrated with it, so now she's trying to get into big law, and she kind of hit a wall because it's a terrible system, but if you don't start in these big law firms, it's really hard to get in otherwise, unless you kind of go through this, like you go and you get high in government or something. So I would just say, I definitely don't feel like everyone has to do big law by any means. And by big law, I mean like these large law firms, like hundreds of people, really long hours, you make good money, but you kind of like sell your soul in the process. But it is great experience and definitely doesn't close doors. And I think you get some credibility almost immediately. Like I've been amazed at how quickly, like I went to lunch before the coronavirus stuff hit with like the acting general counsel of USAID. Like I never would have like been in any kind of a position to have that contact, except someone I work for also worked for her, and we all got together and went to lunch. So it's almost immediately when you're in these places, you start to be able to make connections that kind of help you leapfrog forward and a little bit more quickly. Whereas I think if you start in the UN system, it's like really hierarchical, and you're going to have to like claw your way up, and it may or may not be what you actually want in the end. But I would also just like huge plug for Geneva. Like I think being in DC or Geneva to just be so, and New York, to be so surrounded by organizations and just be with those people, I think you'll be more likely to hear about the experiences or opportunities that are available. And so, I think that helps a lot.
You're preaching to the choir about Geneva. I know Piper spent a semester in Geneva last year.
Yep, that's where I studied abroad, and I worked at the UN. So I, kind of felt it, but I really appreciate those thoughts. And that was very helpful.
Yeah, of course.
Great. Do we have other questions out there before we continue? We have a few other students that I'm happy to jump in. Hard to tell. Okay. If there are questions, great. Let me ask one thing, and then you all can follow up with one another about other questions you have as well. But I wonder if some of you might reflect on where you are now and the sort of relationship between the work you're doing in the law, or you see yourself doing in the law as a calling, versus the work you're doing as a sort of way to make it through the day, or a way to fund something else, or a way to do it. I think law, like many other professions, has a whole range of ways you can approach it and live with it and experience it. And I wonder if you all might take a minute to say a few words about how that relationship is as a sort of calling.
I can kick it off. I think BC definitely got this question stuck in my head, and it's like carried along with me because, it's BC definitely sends you off with the message of work should be something you're passionate about. Figure out what that passion is, what you're good at, and do that thing. And I think that's why I gravitated towards the international studies programs, just because there's so much room to kind of build your own major and figure out what it is you're passionate about and what you want to do. I was also a faith, peace, and justice minor, and that was more focused on American race relations. And then my major was focused mainly on Middle Eastern studies and politics. And graduating and going to a corporate law firm, I was like, I don't know how either of those are going to be relevant. But I think that's what came as a big surprise. Like I found that me being passionate about work kind of came through in different phases. There are definitely some cases, typically mostly pro bono, but actually a few paid cases as well, that I felt like the work I was doing on that team was making a meaningful impact on the world, and tied into key beliefs that I had. And then for the cases where it felt more like, this is my job, I have to do this, and it feels like busy work, and it's like for the sake of making money for the firm, rather than like some intrinsic value that I would do for free. I think I found the joy in that work coming from different sources, such as like the team that I was working with and the people who were investing in me and I was investing in them. I know some people definitely go day to day and just work to make money so that they have money to do things outside of their work that bring them joy and make a difference and impact. So I think I realized that this is where I am for now, and this is where I'm supposed to be. And I'm going to make the most of it. But in the facets that work doesn't fulfill that, passion and that purpose, I have opportunities to find an outlet for that elsewhere. And now coming to NYU, I'm finding the same thing of I have to take these, mandatory classes. Like I have to take contracts and civil procedure and leg reg and these 1L classes, but after that there's so many other ways to explore and figure out and act on my passions in terms of like extracurricular groups I can get involved with. As Camilla alluded to, there's like a ton of clinics and different programs where you can get started as a law student doing work that maybe we're not even qualified to do yet, but it's sort of a learn through trial and error situation. Like we have a program at NYU where students get to represent public school students who have been suspended and like defend them in a hearing and like actually get them back into school and get it off their record and things like that, where you can use your position that you have now, even while you're building towards something in the future, use it and leverage it to make a difference now. So I think as I've gone and my path has felt like uncertain or kind of wavy, some things are leading to the next, like is a stepping stone and is going forward. But at each step, there is something from which I can draw motivation or feel like I'm making a contribution.
That's great. Thank you. Anybody else want to comment on that?
I'll jump in. I echo everything Isaiah said. I also think that don't close your mind to thinking that passion or that connection to your long-term goals has to come as obviously as you would think. There's always, I find, a lot of different sources and places where you can find that motivation, that connection to what you really want to be doing, even when it's not as obvious. Sometimes maybe the bigger picture of what I was doing wasn't really in line with what I was super excited about, but the skill I was learning in that moment or the specific people I was working with or things like that could really excite me. Or sometimes you can find other areas. I know even when I was working at Liberty Mutual, knowing full well I was studying for the LSAT and applying to law school and I wasn't going to continue that career, I was able to find a lot of other areas I connected to. I became part of the diversity and inclusion groups within the corporate space and the employee resource groups, and became the president of the Hispanic resource group there, and had an outlet there to do community initiatives and mentoring and different programs like that. And a lot of things like that usually are available no matter what type of work you're doing. So you can always try to make whatever you're doing your own, find channels to end up connecting more to the things you're interested in, and just don't frustrate yourself. Be open to different sources of motivation, passion. When you know it's a stepping stone to something bigger later, it doesn't have to always look like what you pictured. A lot of times you can kind of make it what you want it to be. So just keep an open mind about those things.
Thank you.
I'll add a perspective as well, which Piper's question actually got me thinking about. There are certainly many pathways through the law, and starting with big law or any of those will definitely give you a leg up in a lot of ways. But I do want to reiterate that it's also possible to go in uncompromisingly public interest, and that's where I have been. Obviously, that's more of a financial strain for people, but that's part of why I spent 5 years before law school figuring out how I would make that work, saving money, speaking to colleagues, researching all of the available scholarship opportunities. Like Elizabeth mentioned a great one, the loan forgiveness program, but there are also many institutions that have their own private scholarships that you don't have to pay back or wait 10 years for. And if you do your research and apply to those schools, you can succeed straight off the bat as a public interest student. And that's what I'm doing at Northeastern. So don't be afraid if that's where your heart really lies after you've thought all of this through. Both paths are really viable.
Yeah, I'd love to echo that. I think one, it's a lot harder. Like the firms that do public interest tend not to be at the career fair, so it's really hard when you're graduating to have an idea of how you could even get those jobs, because often it's who you know, or like they'll put out the word through their networks, which you're not a part of. So it's really annoyingly hard to find sometimes. But once you do, it's not glamorous, but it's nice. I think I had this idea when I started my job that like, oh my gosh, I'm going to help asylum seekers and do all these pro bono work and, you know, just help people all day. And it turns out like, no, we still have to make money. You know, we have a lot of wealthy European clients who are racist and are awful, and you just have to grin and bear it. And, you know, it's not this glamorous, you know, public interest job that I thought it'd be. So I think, and through my understanding of, and through my, I've gotten to know a lot of people who are in public interest and a lot of lawyers who, you know, are solo practitioners who I have no idea how they make their bills because they just take things on with clients who are like, yeah, I'll pay you $2,000 next month and never do. So I don't know how they make it work, but just seeing like how hard that is, that there is no perfect job, that there's no perfect glamorous job like there is in the movies, that everything is gonna frustrate you in certain ways. And I think also, like I mentioned that I, you know, have my day job, but then I also have this organization that I put a lot of time into out of work, and sometimes during work when I maybe should be doing work. But that has allowed me to like, my day job has allowed me to do things outside of work that is my true calling and is my true passion, and reminds me a lot of the things that kind of set my heart aflame at BC. So I think using your job as a springboard into something else is, you know, certainly an amazing thing to do. It's definitely something I'd recommend.
Oh, thanks so much for all that really thoughtful, thoughtful comments. I know Hiroshi has a question or two for folks as well before we, you know, we have a few more minutes left for sure.
Right. So Professor Owens set this whole meeting up. Thank you all for logging in. Thank you all for volunteering to do this. This is also really meant for not just the people who are logged in right now, but of course we're going to record this, save it, post on our website, hopefully so that, you know, sophomores, juniors see it, hopefully applicants to IS in years to come see this. So just, and again, this might be a little tough for some of you because you've been out for a while. What classes did you like at BC? One, just generally, just sort of shout out, hey, taking this class was really fun. Two, were there any ones that you liked for your IS major? Again, it's going to take a bit of mind stretching, but lastly and importantly, did you take any classes at BC that you thought helped you in law school? So there's sort of three different tiers. One, classes you liked. Two, were there any classes in international studies you liked? And then three, lastly, more technically, because I teach international law, I do have students who do go on and do say, hey, I retook it, or I got to pass through the general one and go on to more advanced studies. Or my usual shout out is philosophy logic. I think logic is a really good way to learn how to think through problems systematically. So yeah, I'll just throw it out there. What classes would you recommend to the audience out there that are going to listen to this?
So I actually anticipated this question and logged onto Agora portal to look at all the classes I took, because I was like, I can't remember half of them. And then as soon as I saw them, it was great because I started remembering everything I learned. Well, not everything, but some of the highlights was online communication and global society with Matt Sienkiewicz. He is amazing. And that class is really good. And that's actually pushed me to kind of get interested in IP. This semester I took survey of IP, intellectual property. That was actually part of my IS major. I took social justice of Israel and Palestine with Eve Spangler. I did not get to go on the trip because there was a problem that I think there was a terrorist attack like that fall that we were supposed to go. So the trip got canceled. But besides that, the class was amazing itself. Anything with Jennifer Erickson, I took global governance. That was great. And then ethics, religion, and international politics, I took with Laura Johnston. I don't know if she's still teaching at BC. I think she was like a visiting professor. But that class you have to take for IS, and it's a great class overall. I took a few other classes that kind of cross between international studies and my faith, peace, and justice major, like race, law, and the media, and race, law and resistance. And oh, and of course, I did the summer trip to Kuwait with Professor Kathleen Bailey. She is a great professor and a wonderful human being, and spending 3.5 weeks with her in the Middle East was definitely a highlight of BC. So yeah, there's a lot of ways you can go right at BC, not a lot of ways you can go wrong. So
Yeah, I'd also
Others have some suggestions? Yeah.
Eve Spangler's class is amazing. I'd say anything with Professor O'Rourke is incredible. And one that's not necessarily IS, so maybe I'll get some flack for this, but any writing class you can take in the English department, because you know, in any law, but especially immigration law, like writing affidavits, writing people's stories down is really important, and be able to craft a narrative and like understand narrative to a really good degree helps you a lot. So I actually really appreciated my nonfiction and fiction writing classes. They really helped me out.
I'll echo some of the praise that was already said. Professor Erickson is fantastic. Anything with her, I recommend. Professor Bailey, fantastic. For people who are immigration minded, like I was and am, there's some great classes in other departments, like the history department. Professor O's gender and migration class was one of my favorites I took at BC. That's obviously issue related, specific to me. But you have some great options at BC. I think all of the interdisciplinary choices you have as an IS major open up a whole world to you. So take full advantage of it.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. I also took a lot of classes because of my econ major outside of IS specifically, but they were interdisciplinary with Richard Deese and with Professor Sazzenbacher in the Inequality of Economics department, and immigrants and refugees economics in that area. I also really enjoyed a lot of the law classes I took in the law department with Richard Powers. Both Introduction to Law and Law and Ethics were really, really great for me, kind of seeing how law interplays with ethics and different legal issues around the globe. And then I don't know if it's still a requirement, but the international senior seminar that we had to take as seniors for me was honestly life-changing. That class was by far one of the best experiences I had. I had mine with Brian Garreau, but I've heard that they are all excellent. And I learned a lot about writing and a lot of analysis and deeper thinking that I've definitely applied in law school. So I would recommend, I know it's your second or first semester of senior year and you might have senioritis, but I would really recommend taking advantage of that class to the full extent, because it was honestly the most important thing I did at BC.
Elizabeth, do you have, now that you've been reminiscing about your 10-year reunion, what do you remember from classes you took at BC?
Yeah, I mean, I have to apologize because names have just totally escaped me at this point, but definitely like remember vividly the experiences. I think what's standing out to me, it must have been because I was in ethics and international social justice concentration. I remember a lot of ethics courses. I took law, medicine, and ethics, and another HIV/AIDS and ethics course. And I haven't had the opportunity like in life to think about those sorts of really probing questions. So just really appreciated that. But I will just echo what other people said. Writing, hands down, such an important area to focus on. The most important thing to give you a leg up. I think in a lot of professions, but particularly law, the more writing intensive classes you can take. I've been shocked generally at how there's a lot of people who just really didn't focus on that skill, and it creates a lot of problems for them. So it's a great skill to take out of school to the extent you can focus on it and give it a lot of time and energy.
Great. Well, thanks so much for all of you for taking the time to be here. This has been really great to reconnect with you all, to hear the passion that you take into your work and your studies, and hear the wisdom that you've accumulated or has been hard won for you over the years. We appreciate you being willing to tell your story and to open yourself up to our current students, who I know will be reaching out to you in the future. So thank you again. I'll notify you all when we get this posted so you can see it yourselves as well. But I hope you have a safe weekend, and thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
You bet.